Are we all settled? Cool. So, how many of us do you think have had any sort of a food addiction? So there's people with their hands up and people who are lying. It's massive. You know, who hasn't been touched by that? I certainly have. So I can't think of anybody better to speak about this than the wonderful Jen Unwin. Jen Unwin.
Thank you, Phil. Because I'm low carb, I have very low blood pressure, and I've just done the breathworks thing outside, so I've got even lower blood pressure, and because it's hot, I've got even lower blood pressure, so I've got my emergency stool in case of terminal low blood pressure, so just bear with me. Yes, so I'm Dr. Jen Unwin, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm a food addict. I've been a food addict since time immemorial. I don't really remember a time as a child when I wasn't fascinated by sweets and cakes and how I could get more of them. I remember being sent to Sunday school one time, and we made cheese scones, and we were sent home with them piping hot and slathered in butter. And I cried because I suddenly realised when I got home that they weren't all going to be for me to eat. They were supposed to be for the family to share. And I was devastated. That's one of my earliest memories. Yes, so I obviously didn't know that that was the problem. And I probably only discovered that was the problem about 9 years ago when I was 52, I'm now 61. When I heard someone called Bitten Jonsson talking about this on the Diet Doctor website. She'd done a video about sugar addiction. And so I watched this video and I thought, well, that's me, that's completely me. And I was kind of embarrassed because I'm a psychologist, and of course I trained to work with people with other addictions, alcohol and drugs and nicotine and so on. But I'd never made the link, and I'd struggled my whole life, like many of us, with being overweight. I was an overweight child, which was pretty unusual in the 60s. I was the only girl in my class of girls who was overweight. And that really just started a lifetime of yo-yo dieting, which I'm sure many people here can identify with. We discovered low carb about 14 years ago, and that led into the work with David, and that helped me a lot. That really made a difference in terms of my appetite and my weight management, but it wasn't the whole story. I was still messing around making keto cakes with erythritol, and Ellen's nodding in the front row. So Ellen is another colleague. She's a dietitian, and she works also with people with food addiction. And she's got a program set up under the Public Health Collaboration, and she's going to join me on stage for the Q&As because she knows as much as I do about this topic. Okay, yeah, so that's me. I've got my own story. So you can't see the slides very well, but at the bottom it says, happy are those who dream dreams and are willing to pay the price to make them come true. And I think we've heard a lot about hope, and we've heard a lot about miracles and things happening to people. And my doctorate was actually about hope and how we can bring hope into healthcare and how we should do that for people and what a difference that makes to people to have some kind of hope. And my hope all my life before I found out about food addiction was to be able to understand why I was behaving with food in a way that made no sense, and also to be able to kind of like myself, because I think a lot of people with food addiction feel they don't understand why they behave the way they do. They think they have no willpower. They sometimes, because they're very overweight, they don't like the way that they look, and it's a very shameful condition. We hide it from our friends and family and kind of from ourselves. And so that was my dream personally. And now that I do understand the condition and I understand why it happens and I can explain it to you, my dream is that there won't be a single person with ultra-processed food addiction that doesn't know that it's not their fault. Sorry, the screen keeps doing weird things. It's not their fault, and there is hope. You know, you can be in remission from food addiction, like Ellen and I, and you can learn to like yourself and forgive yourself. So that's where we're going. It's frozen. Okay, we're unfrozen. So this is what I'm going to try and cover, and I want to leave some time so that anyone who's got questions for Ellen and I can ask those questions. But I think it's important that we understand what is addiction, because as Bitten used to say, addiction is addiction is addiction. It's all in the same part of the brain, and it's all the same process. We just use different substances and different behaviours to sort of get that hit, if you like. So what is addiction, and how could it apply to food? I mean, there's lots of people here who've acknowledged that they have a problem with some addiction to food. So I'm sort of preaching to the I don't have to convince you that certain foods can be addictive. I've been part of organising an expert consensus on food addiction. So I want to tell you what the experts say about it. The latest, we've just published that this year. How common is it actually? And also to get into that ancestral perspective of why are our brains doing this to us, and what can we do about it? And then just quickly some results of a study that we did, looking at if we put all that knowledge together for people and we turn it into a treatment program, what happens? Are we actually able to help people? And I've done one treatment study and Ellen's done another. So it's not that, you know, it's just with some kind of special Unwin effect. You know, it can be replicated. And then, you know, how might you get involved, or if you want to know more information, what can you do? But first of all, I don't know if we've got sound on the video, have we? Does anybody know?
Do you want to put sound on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I've gone the wrong way. Which shall I do it with I just wanted to, he's going to say something. Is that too? Sorry, we're just trying to hear Sergey. If we can't hear him, I'll tell you what he said. Sorry, I should have said. He's on there. Fingers crossed. Sergey, who's given his permission to share his video, was part of the treatment study, and this is what he's going to tell you about what it's like to be a person with food addiction. Right. No, hang on. I need to press on here. Sound on here.
Just in one word, a nightmare.
It's okay. Food addiction is a nightmare.
Feeling of being helpless. Feeling of you're just completely out of control. Just this urge comes and there's nothing you can do about it. You feel like there's nothing you can do about it, and it's just it takes you places that you never thought possible.
So I think you can hear in his voice that hopelessness that you know, that we were talking about. People feel incredibly hopeless. They don't know what to do about it. You know, this is an extremely serious condition. It's taking, as he said, mentally it's taking him places he doesn't want to go, but also physically. You know, people are getting really unwell from eating these foods, as we've already heard from the other speakers. Okay, so what is addiction in general? So according to the American Society of Addiction Medicine, who are the people that should know, addiction is a treatable, yes, good, chronic medical disease. Yes, so it's once you've got to that point of being addicted to certain foods, ultra-processed foods usually, it's a chronic condition. So a bit like David's a type 2 diabetic because he ate a lot of lemon meringue pie, cooked by me, I might say, sorry, because we didn't know better. He's a diabetic in remission, so his blood sugars are fine if he eats the way that we've been talking about, low carbohydrate, keto. But if he should go back to eating lemon meringue pies, he would have type 2 diabetes. So it's a chronic condition. In the same way that Ellen and I are food addicts in remission because we don't eat our drug foods, if we went back to eating our drug foods, we would be straight back into it. And everybody understands that with alcohol, don't they? We know, we've had friends or family, or we've seen on the television people with alcohol who are abstinent, they're doing great, and if they have just one drink, they go straight back to where they were. They don't just build up again slowly, they usually go straight back into the addiction, and there's reasons for that. But it's a chronic disease, but it involves complex interactions in brain circuits that have been slightly mentioned, and we're going to go into in a lot more detail. Genetics. So there is a genetic component to addiction, and sometimes addictions can run in families. So if you're having a problem with ultra-processed food, it's worth thinking, well, going back in my family, are there people with addictive type tendencies, not necessarily to food? And a lot of women that come for treatment will say, well, actually, yes, my dad had a problem with alcohol, and I hadn't sort of related the two. And of course that can be an environmental stress as well as a genetic factor, but genetics and the environment's important. So we didn't have ultra-processed food addicts 100 years ago because there weren't any ultra-processed foods. People were eating much more real whole foods. So the environment that we live in now is kind of a disaster in terms of ultra-processed food availability. When they started all the initiatives that they've done with cigarettes, and now you don't see them, do you? You don't see them advertised. They're kind of behind the shelf at booths. I never think about them now when I go in a supermarket, because aren't they behind a cover thing? So people aren't queued for cigarettes as much as they used to be. And there aren't many adverts for alcohol now, are there? But, there's advertising for processed foods on the telly all the time, and particularly aimed at children. So the environment's important, and an individual's life experiences. So we do know there are links with trauma. I mean, that can be in adulthood, but also in childhood. So adverse childhood experiences make somebody more vulnerable to using substances of any kind, but including food as a comfort. And we'll kind of go through how is it that food feels comforting. And I definitely did this as a child. I would go into the kitchen secretly and raid food when nobody else was around, just as a way of sort of either I was bored or I was sort of lonely or something like that, and I would go and steal food out of the kitchen. So people with addiction use substances and or engage in behaviours that become compulsive. So there's this idea that a compulsion is something you can't resist. It's very hard to resist. And we definitely get that with certain foods. And often can continue despite harmful consequences. So David was saying about intelligent people doing stupid stuff. Nobody wants to be 10 stone overweight. That isn't a choice. It's something that's happened because of these compulsions and that inability to change behaviour. So I've already said addiction is addiction. So what you can get is addictions either occurring together, like, smoking and ultra-processed foods, or smoking and alcohol, but also new addictive behaviours may emerge when you're trying to treat the primary condition. And we know, for example, that when people have gastric surgery for weight loss, one of the side effects, which is not insignificant, is that they develop a new alcohol use problem, because you can still get the alcohol down to get that feel-good feeling. So that's a sort of commonly known thing in that field. And also, if you ever go to an AA meeting where they're giving up alcohol, you'll see them all smoking outside the door, having the really strong coffee, and there's a biscuit table. So all of those things do affect the same part of the brain. Okay, so this is just something to think about. If the brain was a guy on an elephant, and this is actually David's idea that I've stolen, and we think of the guy on the elephant. He's trained the elephant, hasn't he? And he's kind of has an idea that he's steering it, and he's telling it which way to go. But let's think about the elephant being the sort of primitive survival brain. So we've already seen the brain has these kind of frontal lobes, which is our modern man, intelligent, think it through before you act sort of brain, strategic brain. And we've got the primitive survival part of the brain, which just gets us to do stuff because it's a survive. We need to survive, we need to do this, we need to eat, we need to run, whatever it might be. So who actually decides where to go in that scenario? If that elephant sees something it wants to eat, or maybe a lovely lady elephant who's just off screen, who's going to actually decide? Well, it's going to be the elephant, isn't it? Because the elephant's got more power. So it's one way of thinking about our brains, which helps us to understand what goes on in addiction. That we think we've got free will and we're in charge of ourselves. But actually the primitive survival part of the brain is much more powerful, and it doesn't use language, so you can't argue with it. Okay. And then another slight aside. So we've been talking about hope, and I think hope is a lot to do with an idea of a preferred future. And it's having an idea that you'll be able to get to that preferred future. So lovely, was it Lydia who spoke this morning? There were times when she didn't think she'd ever be well, and she kept trying things, didn't she? She was actually an incredibly hopeful person. She didn't give up, and then she finally found Phil, and he helped her to get to that place where she wanted to be. And I think it's really important that we have that hope for a preferred future. And I was learning at a recent conference about the importance of C-type goals. I don't know if anyone else has heard of C-type goals. These are not just sort of a preferred future. These are something you really, really want, to quote the Spice Girls, a sort of moonshot goal. And it's something you really would wish for, and something that really gets you passionate and would cause you to sort of grow and stretch, and would be sort of scary and exciting at the same time. But you may have no idea how you're going to get there. You just know that you must and you will. So it's a sense of purpose and a sense of passion. And people who have these C-type goals, usually are very good in terms of sort of mental well-being. And also it takes a tribe of people to get there. Anyway, my C-type goal, and probably one of Ellen's as well, and definitely probably one of David's, is to get the World Health Organization to recognize ultra-processed food addiction as an official diagnosis. Because at the minute, if you have a problem with your relationship with alcohol, or your relationship with nicotine, or relationship with drugs, or even with porn, or these kinds of things, you can get help on the NHS. Those are all diagnosable conditions. At the minute, if you go to your doctor and say, I'm addicted to sugar, I can't give it up, or I'm addicted to, David has lots of patients who can't give up bread, but they've got diabetes, so it's doing them loads of harm. there's no help for you. They'll say, well, that doesn't exist. So yeah, that's my C-type goal. So what we did in 2021 was we made an application to the World Health Organization to say we think there's enough evidence now for you to recognize that ultra-processed foods are addictive. Oh, we didn't say, in that first application we said that, you know, there's a thing, food addiction thing. Screen's doing its thing. And we gave all the evidence, and lots of academics and professionals supported us. Now, we weren't very hopeful. We thought, how likely is it that the World Health Organization is going to say that ultra-processed foods are addictive? And they came back and they said, well, no, they're not actually, because there's no consensus around this topic. You're all disagreeing about what to call it, and what it is, and what causes it, and so on. And they said that the current categories in the ICD, which is their classification of diseases, obesity and eating disorders, account for food addiction. So we don't need a new diagnosis, because actually it's just obesity and or eating disorders. And they said there's been no treatment studies. And they said that recognizing a new condition would cause confusion. I've just put an exclamation mark there, but that isn't what I really think. What I really think is because that is not a reason for not recognizing it. The fact it's going to cause confusion. I'm sure when lots of other diagnoses were introduced, some of the doctors were a bit confused at first. So we'll just ignore that one. But we're going to deal with the others, the arguments against the others. So the first one was that there's no consensus around this topic. So what we got, we contacted everybody we could think of in the academic world and the clinical world who's working with this problem, and we put them into sort of workshop groups and get them to talk to each other, and we asked them certain questions, and over a few months with facilitation we tried to get them to agree some statements about this condition. What we managed to do was to get out of those 40 people, 37 of the academics and professionals were able to agree quite a long statement. And I know that since then, one person's changed their mind. So that's 30, it would have been 38. And that group of people were from all over the world, and they said there is enough evidence to justify the classification of a new substance use disorder relating to ultra-processed food. They said the disorder should be called ultra-processed food addiction. It's been called all kinds of things: sugar addiction, carb addiction, food addiction. But we felt it was really important to agree one thing to call it, so that when research is done or when studies are published, it's all aligned. And also, doesn't that really point the finger where the finger needs pointing? Because, you know, it's since the advent of these foods that people have started losing control of their relationship with them. So it should be called ultra-processed food addiction. And the symptoms that describe this thing are the symptoms of any kind of addiction. So we're going to go through those in a bit more detail in a minute. So that the symptoms of alcohol as a substance use disorder, or any of the other substance use disorders, exactly map on to ultra-processed food addiction. And given that ultra-processed food addiction is a substance use disorder, which is what they were all agreeing, then abstinence from a person's drug foods will be the mainstay of treatment. So we all know, going back to alcohol, that if someone's lost control of their relationship with alcohol, that every time they have it, they lose control, they drink way too much and bad stuff happens. That the treatment, the answer is to abstain from alcohol. So in this case, what we're saying is that someone's lost their control of their relationship with certain foods, then the treatment is abstinence from those foods. So sorry to anyone in the audience that hadn't already put that together, because that can be quite a piece of news. And for those of us that had a very dear, loving relationship with our drug foods, that can really feel like a shocking piece of news. Food addiction exists on a continuum. So yes, you know, there's people who are early stage and people who are kind of late stage, like any other addiction. And it can co-occur with eating disorders. So you can have, for example, ultra-processed food addiction and a binge eating disorder, for example, or you can have, they can be separate. You can have a binge eating disorder without food addiction, or with, or you can, yeah, so, but it is a distinct disorder. And they also agreed that recognition of the disorder will obviously lead to more funding for research and treatment, which I've already mentioned. So that was good. We were pleased about that. So just to go through then, in terms of, so we've agreed it's possible to be addicted to ultra-processed food, and we've agreed that actually that looks like any other addiction, and probably the treatments are pretty similar. So what are the symptoms? And you can play along here. We come up with the acronym CRAVED, and we've got a screening questionnaire which has these 6 questions. And these are literally the symptoms of any kind of addiction from the World Health Organization. And if you have 3 or more, it's not a diagnosis, but it indicates there's probably something going on there that you ought to be thinking about. So the first symptom is compulsion, as we've said, cravings and compulsions, powerful urges to consume foods, even when you're trying not to, and it becomes too hard to resist. So you're sitting watching the telly and you know there's a bar of chocolate in the cupboard and you're saying to yourself, no, I've decided I'm not having that, it's not good for me. The Dr. Unwin said I shouldn't have Cadbury's chocolate because it's bad for my diabetes, and you watch a bit more telly, but the feeling's still there, and it grows and grows to the point where you think, well, I'm never going to stop thinking about this chocolate and then unless I actually get up and finish the bar, put the wrapper in the bin. So has anyone had compulsions that are so strong that they couldn't resist them for certain foods? Yes, me too. So that's one. R is reaching for more. This is the idea of tolerance. So we all understand with alcohol that if you have one drink a night with your meal, glass of red wine, first few times you might feel a little bit relaxed and tipsy. But after about a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, well, you're having your glass of wine and it's not really hitting the sides. Because your body and brain have adjusted to that level of alcohol, and you need a little bit more to get that relaxed, fuzzy feeling, that sort of feeling you're looking for. So you think, right, well, I'll have a couple of glasses, and that carries on for a bit, and then you think, well, you know, between me and my wife, we might as well finish the bottle. So that's like 2.5, 3 glasses, and on we go. So have you noticed yourself needing more and more of that food to get the effect that you were looking for, to sort of feel, right, I've had enough of that food now? Has the amount been increasing? Yeah, a few people. A is for activities neglected, and this is where over time you're thinking about the food and you're trying to find the food and you're feeling bad because you've had the food, starting to take life over, such that you start sort of doing less of the things that you like, your hobbies, family, things. You may even not be trying so hard at work because you're sort of distracted. Activities neglected. Does anybody notice that happening, where they're thinking too much about food and less about other things? Fewer people, just me and Ellen. V is for volume, and this is always losing control of the amount. So saying to yourself, right, this time I'm only going to have 2 squares of that Cadbury chocolate and keep the rest for, I'm going to have 2 squares a night for the week, and that'll last me. But it never is that. It's never 2 squares. So who's that happened to, where you just lose control of the amount? Yeah, so that's a really common one. And then E is for exclusion. This is the withdrawal symptom. So if you try and cut it out, if you try and exclude, do you experience withdrawal symptoms? This could be headaches, it could be shaky, could be grumpy, sleep problems, stomach problems, could be anything like that, or just basically feeling rubbish if you try and stop the sugars and the carbs. We've all been through that. And then the last one is D for damage, which is continuing to use the foods even though you know they're doing you harm. Has anybody done that? Yes, quite a few of us. Okay, so yeah, you see that those are it's pretty simple. Those are the 6 symptoms. Right, another simple way of looking at it, which David sometimes uses in the clinic, he just basically will say to people, well, does it feel like you've got an addictive relationship with bread? And we like to say, when 1 is too many and 1,000 is never enough. So the first bite of it is the one that gets you going. And don't you just love the marketing people who are actually marketing, what is that, a Mars bar, is it, or a marathon or something? Let's say it's a Mars bar. They're actually marketing the Mars bar as a cure for withdrawal symptoms from sugar, because grumpy, knackered, fuzzy-headed and sluggish is how you feel when you've been on a sugar high and you're coming off it. So they're literally marketing it as a cure for the thing that it's causing. Fantastic. Okay, so how common do we think this is? What's the sort of what's the sort of consensus? There was a really large meta-analysis published in 2022, and lots and lots of studies using a questionnaire called the Yale Food Addiction Scale, which is one that's used a lot in research. And they think 14% of the general population have scores which indicate they've got this level of a problem, ultra-processed food addiction. So that's quite a big chunk of people. With certain conditions, it's higher. So 55% of people with binge eating disorder, for example, there is an overlap. They probably have an ultra-processed food addiction. And if you think about what goes on in binge eating disorder, then that makes complete sense. It also looks pretty high in bulimia and type 2 diabetes, which makes perfect sense, and obesity. The rates are much higher. So any clinician working in the NHS is coming across people with ultra-processed food addiction in all their clinics, and yet probably 1% of them have heard of it or would know what to do about it. Very worrying, of course, like we've all been talking about the kids. 15% in children and adolescents overall, and 19% in overweight or obese children. So it's a really serious problem coming down the line that kids are very early in life developing this problem, and it's hard to get out of once you're in it. So food addiction is very strongly associated with type 2 diabetes. So Christina Horsager in 2023 found that if you had food addiction, you were nearly 7 times more likely to have type 2 diabetes. So, and that's never going to improve until we address the root cause, which is the food addiction. But there's also a dose-like response to food addiction prevalence and mental health problems, again, which we've already talked about. So the worse your food addiction, the more likely you are to have type 2 diabetes, but also the more likely you are to have a mental health problem. So let's just look at the size of it in the UK. Just taking that 14% prevalence, it's over 6 million adults in the UK. And all of those people who are struggling have a much greater likelihood of having these serious physical health problems, but also serious mental health problems. So people are coming to harm. This is what makes me so passionate about it. People are coming to harm mentally and physically because of this condition, and it's because of the availability of those foods in part. But food addiction takes many shapes, so we have many people coming forward to treatment that are normal weight or underweight. So it's not necessary, you can't recognise somebody with a food addiction by just saying, that they're overweight. So, that's one point to refute with the WHO is it's not the same as obesity. It's not the same as eating disorders. They're actually wrong about that. Right. So what's going on? Why can't we control our relationship with these foods? So simply what happens is that when we eat sugar and carbohydrates, we get an abnormal level of response in the brain in terms of dopamine. So dopamine is the reward neurotransmitter, and we needed eating to be rewarding. When we were caveman and woman, we were on the plane, we needed to be very motivated to go and find food because it was pretty dangerous. So it was good that we were very motivated, and that when we found food, we found it rewarding, so we're more likely to go and do it again. So it's literally a survival mechanism that we find food and eating rewarding. But the level, we didn't have the refined sugars that we have now. We didn't have the refined carbohydrates. I think it was Phil that was saying we didn't have those combinations of salt, fat, and sugar, or salt, fat, and refined grains. That the worst culprits in terms of food are things like donuts and pizza and ice cream. When they've asked people which are the foods you can't control, those are the kinds of foods. We get a big release of dopamine, which is this reward motivation neurotransmitter, which makes us feel pretty good, and also serotonin, which is the happy, relaxed neurotransmitter. So we get a nice boost of that as well. So we're feeling pretty good. Everything in nature likes to be in balance, we know that. So in the brain, dopamine gets released and it gets picked up by some receptors. What happens in the brain is that those receptors get what they call down-regulated. So they get sort of put out of commission, if you like, because there's too much dopamine going around in the brain, so we thought, get rid of some of the receptors for dopamine and some of the receptors for serotonin. Well, I hope you can see that it's not at all a good idea to knock out your dopamine and serotonin receptors, because those are the motivation hormone, neurotransmitter, and the relaxed, happy neurotransmitter, which we need access to. So they're knocked out a bit, so we have fewer brain receptors for those. So the result is obvious. We then feel unmotivated, which I don't know about anyone else, but if I eat foods like that, or used to eat foods like that, I would just feel like rubbish. You don't feel like doing anything. You're just kind of sitting around, feel unmotivated. So you've got low mood and a lack of motivation. But then this is where the cravings and compulsions start, because actually your brain's trying to seek out that dopamine to sort of boost you back up, and we'll be sort of, you know, what were the circumstances when I last experienced that? And then you get the cue. For example, maybe you're getting fuel from the garage and you're starting to feel a bit stressed and grumpy at the end of your work day or whatever it is. You walk in to try and get your fuel, and there you've got to walk past 10 meters of chocolate and crisps, and you remember, but also your brain is cued to think, well, last time I had that, you know, I felt pretty good for a while. That gave me a boost, so you take it, and round the cycle you go. But unfortunately, the more that we repeat those behaviors, the less our accessibility to dopamine and serotonin and the feel-good neurotransmitters. So this exactly explains why people with a high sugar diet are more likely to have mental health problems, because their brain is not got in balance for the neurotransmitters. Okay. Hang on. Okay, so that's a sort of quick overview of why, you know, sugar and ultra-processed foods are sort of dampening down your brain, in fact. So more stuff about ultra-processed foods and why they're addictive. Oh, and just to point out, by the way, sweeties are always very colourful, aren't they? And don't you think maybe they kind of mimic in nature what we were looking for? You know, we were looking for fruits and vegetables and things that might have a bit of colour. The fruits were probably about this big, weren't they? So you had to have very good eyesight to find the wild berries, because they weren't like we have today. But don't you think they would have been colourful, and that was something we were looking for. So I think some of how they design ultra-processed foods is to sort of, to cue that ancient brain into action. So high sugar, salt and fat stimulate dopamine, as we've already said, and that activates the brain reward pathways. And that's exactly what's happening in other addictions. So alcohol gives you this dopamine high, which then comes, what goes up must come down. We know that about drugs. Obviously, drugs like cocaine and heroin, it's a similar kind of process. Nicotine and caffeine as well, the same. Bless the food industry. So what happened when the writing was on the wall for smoking and nicotine, and us all understanding that cigarettes were very harmful to health, is that the big tobacco companies invested in food companies. They bought up a lot of the food companies that existed at the time, and then they brought their marketing and their packaging strategies to food. And this is well documented. If you want to read the book Hooked by Michael Moss, who's an investigative journalist, I highly recommend that. So they designed the foods to sort of enhance that effect. They literally would put people in brain scanners and feed them the foods and see which formulations would light up people's brains the most. So they're designed to be hyper palatable and addictive, literally. And they combine that rare combination of fat, sugar, and salt, and MSG and other delightful ingredients that make us crave. So we feel good for a bit, and then we crash, and then we repeat, and then we're cued in to keep repeating that. So it triggers compulsive eating even when we're not hungry. And a lot of people say that when they're really in the food addiction. Well, I'm not hungry, I'm eating, but I'm never. Some people have said to me, I don't think I've ever felt hungry. I've never got to that point. Also, those foods are very low satiety. They lack protein, so not satiating, and they're easy to eat, easy to binge without feeling satisfied. Everybody now has heard of Chris Van Tullochen, haven't they, and his brother, and they've been doing a lot of stuff on ultra-processed food. And he did this experiment, didn't he, where he ate ultra-processed food. Was it for a month? Yeah. He ate nothing but ultra-processed food for a month, and they scanned his brain. And the red lines, which I don't know if you guys can see, but some new connections were formed in his brain during that month. And they scanned him even 6 months after he'd stopped doing it and gone back to eating real whole foods. And those connections were still there. So once you've wired the brain for addiction, it's quite hard to unwire it, actually. And you can see that there's a lot more activity in the cerebellum at the back of the brain, which is part of the primitive brain, and this mid part of the brain, which is. Do you remember we were saying about that elephant who was in control? So it's the kind of elephant parts of the brain. And another really fascinating thing that happens when we eat these foods and when dopamine starts flowing is that the frontal lobes, the sort of logical, clever part of your brain, gets shut down. And this is why we think, sometimes it feels to people like they're not in control. The elephant's in control. They've said they don't want to eat that chocolate or whatever it is. They started the diet on Monday, but actually they see themselves, and this used to happen to me, disembodied hand reaching for the foods that you'd said you weren't going to eat. And that's because dopamine has shut down the frontal lobes. And the ancestral link in there is that it was very dangerous to get food when you were going hunting megafauna on the plains with your little spindly spear or your little hand axe. It was actually really dangerous, so you had to not think too much about danger and why it might be a bad idea, because you'd just stay in the cave and starve to death. So they had to be really motivated to go and get food. These days, we just go on an app on our phone and the guy brings us a Domino's. So there's no danger involved in in today's food environment. So that's important. So how else does evolution explain food addiction? So we crave high energy foods, don't we? Like, you can't get much more energy dense than a donut, really, or a pizza. It's just absolutely crammed with energy and calories. So we evolved to seek those out. And as we've already heard, fats and carbs are absolutely vital for winter survival. So if we knew where there were some nuts, or something like that, or some fruits, we would remember where they were, and we'd be highly motivated to go and get as many of them as we can and eat them as fast as we could. So or for example, like maybe we knew where there was a bee's nest with some honey in. Ellen and I would have been really good honey collectors. You'd be motivated because you're probably going to get stung half to death, aren't you? But you'd have your honey, so you'd be so happy. So dopamine, the reward system shortcut. The reward system evolved to reinforce eating, as we've said, but ultra-processed food takes that too high. It takes it to the next level. Sweet things obviously signaled survival, but there weren't many sweet things. Breast milk, I think, is a bit sweet. A few berries are a bit sweet. Honey, if you were very daring. But now it just triggers those habit loops via cues. I've got a funny story. I don't know if people have heard of Georgia Eade. She's a psychiatrist who specializes in helping people with keto diets, but she freely admits to being a food addict. We were driving around Birmingham in a car together, and there was a huge advert for what we knew to be Cadbury's. It was literally just a purple poster, but it was enormous. It was about 10 meters high or something. And I can't remember how we knew it was Cadbury's. It just had maybe a picture on or their logo or something. And we both admitted that we literally started salivating when we saw this Cadbury's poster. We were so cued by Cadbury's purple that's how it worked, and obviously how it was a survival mechanism back in the day, to be cued by seeing foods to eat them or to want them. But now it's everywhere. It's everywhere, and we're cued multiple times a day. Television, petrol stations, phones. Those cues are everywhere. So we're craving all the time because we're already wired. There's nobody here that's never eaten some sort of ultra processed food. So the fact that we can't rely on willpower, and we all feel bad, like I should be able to control myself. Oh, I'm such a weak person. Willpower wasn't designed for this. We didn't need to resist food historically. We needed to eat food to survive. And our ancestors, thank you, ancestors, they didn't resist eating. They ate, and that's how they got through the winter. So it's actually very hard for us to resist eating, and the food's everywhere. So there's a constant battle. Maybe some more ideas about how it is that these foods can be addictive. I think that these modern foods and these high sugar diets actually damage your mitochondria, the little energy marvelousnesses that are in all our cells and are creating all our energy that we need. I think we damage those with high sugar diets. So not only do we feel bad in the sort of neurotransmitter sense, I think we feel bad in a fundamental body energy sense. We're trying to, it felt like that to me. I was trying to get some energy always, and the only way I knew, because that was the message, is that carbs are energy. So my breakfast would be a brown bread banana sandwich, because that's healthy, isn't it? Surely. And I would take it, and as I was driving to work, I'd eat this thing. By 10 o'clock, I was absolutely ravening, and I'd have to eat my hummus brown pita bread. So I didn't have any, it was all carbs, I didn't have any protein, I was starving. So those that know about operant conditioning know that if something makes you feel temporarily better, that's reinforced as well. So I felt temporarily better when I ate my banana sandwich. I felt pretty good for about an hour. So eating banana sandwiches was actually reinforced because I thought they made me feel better. I've said about the suppression of the frontal lobes, so that happens, so we just do stupid stuff, and the wiring of the brain. So neurons that fire together wire together, and you make this pathway that then is very difficult to get off. But also maybe cravings exist because of what David was saying, that we're eating a nutritionally deficient diet. So what if, I was down at the bottom of that graph that he was telling you. I was trying to get my nutrition from grains and things like that, because that's what we'd been told. But maybe my body was trying to get me to keep eating until I actually had some nutrients. So maybe I was nutrient hungry, if you like. So now, whenever I have liver now, there's a definite cut-off. Like, you eat so much liver and then you think, can't actually eat any more of that. And you get that real GLP-1 effect where you're just not hungry anymore. And if somebody was trying to give you something, you'd be like, I really can't eat. So are we eating to try and meet our nutrient needs? So we need to eat for nutrient density as food addicts. That's a definite, it's a kind of bottom line, really, is that part of the treatment, is that you eat nutrient-dense foods. Okay. And also, it's just so obvious now I think about it. What are our brains made of? They're very mitochondria heavy, they're very energy hungry. Neurons, nerves, and grey matter, and cholesterol, as David said, they're very fat. The brain is very fatty. So what's it made of? It's made of proteins and fats and minerals and vitamins. So that's what we need to eat. We need to eat protein and fat to feed the brain and build a brain. It's not made of bananas. What was I thinking? And I love that fact that if you drain a human body of blood and boil it down, how much sugar is actually in an adult's bloodstream, and it's one teaspoon of sugar at any one time. When I learnt that fact, that sort of put everything into place, because bananas are 5 or 6 teaspoons of sugar, so nobody needs a banana. We can all make our own sugar. If anyone's on Twitter, X, I recommend you follow Sama Hool, who's become one of my new favourites. And he's got this lovely, he just put this tweet up on Thursday, and it's the doctor saying to the cave people, I can't let you do this. That mammoth is teeming with saturated fat, cholesterol, and 0 dietary fibre. Instead, go forage the local savannah and look for the sacred granola bar, the ancient peanut butter powder, and the wild spirulina chips. If you're lucky, you might stumble upon an ancient vending machine containing trail mix. I love it. All his tweets are funny like that. Yeah, it just makes sense, doesn't it? So, you know what to eat. You've heard everybody else. Meat, eggs, fish, all kinds of meat, eggs and fish, offal if you want it, lard, tallow, beef fat, butter or ghee. Butter, some people good with, some people not. Oils, we don't mind, and if you do well with them, that's also fine. Above ground veg, if you want to eat some veg. Avocados, pickled vegetables, as long as they haven't got sugar in. Water, coffee and tea. So that's and mammoth, I've put mammoth. You can have some of that if you can find it. So that's the green list of foods that you can eat freely from as an ultra-processed food addict, and you're probably going to be fine. Obviously, you need to, people individualize it for themselves. Dairy, I think, has already been mentioned, and nuts are in the amber category because some people don't do well. They massively overeat dairy, or it's very inflammatory for them. And again, nuts, I think because it's that rare combination of carbs and fat and a bit of protein, people can overeat them because they're winter foods, weren't they? Winter survival foods. Okay, how are we doing for time? What can we do about ultra-processed food addiction? We can understand what we've talked about, recognise that cravings are biological, not a weakness, and you track your triggers and really notice what's going on. Change your food environment. This is a massive one, really. People do really well if they can get all of that stuff out of the house, because then you're not being, at least at home, you're not being cued by ultra-processed foods and your drug foods. If you live maybe with members of the family who don't want to give up theirs just yet, then ask them to keep them out of your sight. We get lots of people on the treatment program that have to persuade the family to lock them away in a cupboard that they don't have the key to, etc. Prepare your food, plan your food, and make sure it's nutrient dense and you just eat when you're hungry. Set boundaries around food. Get support. This is massively important. People do much better in a support group of other people, because often you are the only one in the family, and you need your tribe to support you. And then maybe join the campaign to help get this condition recognised, or to push for changes in education and advertising and so on. Working towards abstinence is obviously key. Sugar, flour and processed foods are your main culprits, and a real food focus. You can't have cheat days, I'm so sorry. I know that's a thing. On other diets, you can have a cheat day. You can't have a cheat day, obviously. You wouldn't say that to someone with alcohol problem, would you? Oh, it's Friday, it's your day off. No, because you can't get back on the wagon once you've done that. Sweeteners, I mean, obviously they're not real foods, so we would recommend you avoid them. If you need to use them to get off the sugars, go ahead and do that as a sort of transition, but they're so hard. I've really struggled with sweeteners. That was almost as hard as it was as hard as giving up the sugar, I would say. It's not all about weight loss. You probably will lose weight, but it's not about weight loss. It's about stable, nutritious eating and neurotransmitter regulation. You won't get anywhere till you've done that. Beware of other addictive substances, because I've said, there's one disease with many different possible outlets. So beware of alcohol. I've given it up now. Obviously beware of nicotine and caffeine. Nuts, cheese and dairy we've mentioned, and support. So this is interesting, because I heard the breathworks lady say about dose. So we've both come up with this independently, another acronym. It's not all about the food. It's also about healing your brain and trying to get those neurotransmitters without those ultra-processed foods as the source. So you're trying to get dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, which is the sort of natural painkillers, in other ways. So how might we do that ancestrally? What makes sense in terms of sort of brain neurochemistry? How can we do that naturally? And I mean, I'm preaching to the converted here, I'm sure, but sunlight, we know early morning sunlight gives you serotonin, and serotonin gets converted into melatonin later on in the day. So you're going to sleep better if you start the day right with some sunlight. Also dopamine. And also you're going to get vitamin D, which is absolutely essential for brain function. And obviously our lovely ancestors were outside the entire time, so they got plenty of natural light. Movement, again, we all know dopamine, movement's brilliant for just about everything. Dopamine, serotonin, endorphins. Also, if you happen to maybe go a walk with your dog or with your dear husband, and maybe you were holding hands with your dear husband, that's going to give you oxytocin, which is the closeness neurotransmitter that we know from mums and babies. So walk, it doesn't have to be crazy HIIT exercise. You do that if you want, but walking, dancing, hunting, thinking of our son who loves shooting deer. All of those things are going to release all these neurotransmitters, and obviously, again, our ancestors were always moving. They were outside. They were hunting, foraging, building houses, carrying stuff, and dancing, and so on. Cold and heat exposure, you know, they lived without climate control. They were outdoors. They were too hot in the summer, I'm sure, like us today, which is probably doing as good. They were too cold in the winter, but they had natural responses to that, where it releases endorphins and dopamine. You know, if you get in that cold bath, you're going to be feeling the cold tub out there. Yeah, you'll be feeling amazing afterwards. And same, the saunas and the fire pits, they release endorphins as well and trigger relaxation. Whole food diets, I mean, we've probably talked about all of that, but you need those amino acids like tryptophan and tyrosine that come from your protein to make neurotransmitters. Nose to tail eating, ruminants. Fasting, now be a little bit careful. Those of you who put your hands up to everything. We don't recommend a lot of fasting, certainly in the beginning, for people with food addiction, because then you're likely to go a little bit, what should we say, bingy when you come off the fast. But if you're a person that hasn't got to that point yet, you know, that was a natural thing that people did. Obviously, they had to fast because they didn't always have access to food, and if they had an abundance of food because they'd killed the woolly rhino or mammoth, they had to eat it before it went off. So people did feast and fast, and you know, there's neurotransmitter tie-in there. Community's fantastically important. Try and find something that gets you in some kind of community. Animal, we know that pets are very good for your mental and physical health, and this is probably why. Oxytocin, tribe-based living, strong social cohesion. We've lost a lot of that in modern life, so trying to get back into that. Sleep, everybody knows, we hear all about it all the time, but sleeping in the natural rhythms and chrononutrition, sort of chronological approaches, circadian rhythms. You know, they didn't have light, so they weren't up late at night, they just went to bed. And in the winter, they, you know, didn't do very much. I was seeing a paper the other day, which was that things like our reaction times and our thinking slow down in the winter, and they would have done, obviously historically, because there wasn't much to do. We were just all rested, and we all got on with what we needed to get on with when it was light like this. And breath control, thank you for the amazing lunchtime workshop, which supports GABA, serotonin, endorphins, slow rhythmic breathing, and obviously the ancestral tie-ins about there would have been fire ceremonies, ritualistic kind of dances, and you know, I'm sure all that was going on. And then play and novelty. We were mentioning about the children and how in modern life they're not playing, they're not learning things, they're not running around and developing their brains by interacting with the environment. And we don't need to lose that as we get older. We can still play between children and adults, you know, making things, exploring places, problem solving. And then the last one is contact with nature. You know, there's so much evidence that getting out in green spaces or being by the sea, flowing water, biodiversity, it just stimulates the brain. And obviously our ancestors' constant immersion in the wild, whereas so many of us, particularly if we live in cities, are just disconnected from that. And so we need to be more caveman woman and I think the thing is, try and think how you'd like to incorporate that in your own. How can you be a bit more cave person in your own life? Is there something from the things that I've talked about that you're thinking, yeah, I could do a bit more of that? And that will help balance the brain in a natural way without having to turn to food, which is a lot of us got in the trap of. Even when you've given up all your drug foods, as I've said, we can still be cued and have cravings sort of come upon us, even a long time into abstinence. Ellen's saying yeah. The acute withdrawals phase is probably only 2 weeks or so at the max, would you say? About 2 weeks for the sort of acute, right, I'm not, you know, I've given up the sugar and physiologically I've got over that. But, you know, we're both sort of years in and I definitely still get get cravings. So, you know, how to cope with that. And I think the thing is to think a bit like everything else, that, you know, nobody laughs forever or cries forever, do they? It sort of plays itself out, if you like. So if you can think, when a craving comes, it feels like it's impossible to resist, and it feels like it's going to last forever, but it won't last forever. You know, you can set a timer and say, you know, well, I'll see how I feel in 10 minutes. And usually it's gone by then. Or you can try and do something sort of somatic, if you like, and surprise yourself out of it. So like a splash of cold water on the face or on the forearms. You can say out loud, oh, bloody hell, I'm having a craving for Cadbury's chocolate. I don't want to eat Cadbury's chocolate. And in that way, you're bringing the frontal lobes back in a little bit. You're sort of getting out of your own head. Breath work or the physiological sigh. Do people know about that? Huberman's thing that there's loads of evidence for, which is a double inhale and then an exhale, and do a few rounds of that. So it goes, and do a few of those. And I love that one, actually. I do actually do that. Or like in the car, I do a few rounds of that, and it does calm you right down. Go for a walk, have a little bounce up and down. Anything else? What do you do, Ellen?
I go with it will pass, and then I like to make myself laugh, and I'll go, like a fucking kidney stone, but it will pass. And then I shake it
out, yeah. Did you hear that? So she says it will pass, and she says like a kidney stone, has a laugh and shakes it out.
I've used hypnotherapy really successfully with an NLP anchor. So quickly. So you just push the point and it just goes. Done.
Yeah, brilliant. And people do tapping.
Anything to shift the emotion.
Yeah.
Take your head out of the cycle.
Take your head out and get into something physical. Absolutely. Brilliant. Really quickly, because we do want some time for questions. We did a study. It was an online study. We had some people in this. We were in the UK, but we had some colleagues in North America and some colleagues in Sweden. Did a similar program online. Lots of people took part, and it's sort of based on the ideas that I've been talking about. We educated people about addiction. We told them to give up their drug foods, and we supported them in doing that, and we helped them cope when cravings came, and we told them that if they slipped up, that is absolutely fine. It's how you learn. What have you learned from that slip up? How would you do it differently next time? And we were really happy with the results. At 12 months follow-up, we had 62% of the completers were in remission from food addiction. I'm going to skip that one. I'll show you that one. That's just to show, so top left is the craved score, which comes down to normal over 12 months. And you can see what's interesting is actually continued improving after the program. It's before, after 6 months and 12 months, and it carried on coming down. The Yale Food Addictions Scale mirrored that exactly. And the well-being scale, which is the sort of, you know, how you're feeling psychologically, that improved massively during the program. And stayed high. This was more like a normal score, whereas they had very poor well-being at the beginning, as we might have expected. And then all you need to take from this one is that in the columns on the left, there's a lot of dark purple, which is people with severe food addiction symptoms. And in the columns on the right, there's more light blue and light purple, which is either no food addiction symptoms or mild food addiction symptoms. So, we're really, really happy with that. And David always tells me off if I don't say this was the first ever published study of food addiction treatment. And Ellen's is going to be the second. I think I'll skip Karen. Can we still do sound? Thanks. I'll go on to this one because this is a good one.
Chris?
We're nearly at the end now.
Could you do channel 6?
Alcoholism, and the aha moment when I realized that my alcoholism and my addiction to processed food were so interlaced, and that, you know, a little bit of embarrassment that it had taken me that long to realize. they were almost one and the same, except for that I had to do a lot more apologizing after I quit drinking.
I love that. I'll skip Bridget for time. That's my little book that I wrote in lockdown. It's called Fork in the Road. You can get it on Amazon, and all profits go to this campaign to get food addiction recognised as a condition. So that's one way you can support us. I'm co-editing a special issue of Frontiers in Psychiatry, which is a journal, on ultra-processed food addiction, and we're going to have there's already about 13 papers published there. If you follow that link, there's going to be 15 probably total, so that's 15 papers on this subject. So in response to the WHO, who said there wasn't a consensus, there is. They said that ultra-processed food was obesity or eating disorders. It isn't. They said there was no outcome data. There is. And number 4, you know what I think about that, when they said it was just causing confusion. And very, very soon, on the 4th and 5th of September, we're all gathering in London for the International Food Addiction and Comorbidities Conference. You'd be extremely welcome. There's still some in-person tickets left, but also you can live stream. So if you sign up for the live stream, you'll get all the videos and you can watch them in your own time. And if you use the code SSO, you can ask me about it later, you'll get 40% off, because it's a speaker special offer. And that's it. Thank you for sticking with. Any questions for Ellen and I? Shout, and I'll repeat it.
In the scope of my work as a dermatology specialist, I occasionally see people who've become addicted to non-ultra-processed foods, such as carrots and beetroots. Have you encountered many non-ultra-processed food addictors?
Did you hear that? Can other real foods be addictive? I mean, some of us end-stage food addicts can overeat anything, including broccoli.
Broccoli, yes, I didn't love broccoli. Broccoli's one of mine, actually. If they've put down all the other foods that have been really, really sweet, carrots and sweet corn are really nice. I could go to town on carrots and sweet corn because they're so sweet. They seem to give me that hit. And sweet potato, I never liked that. No, I was never one for that.
Some people think,
but
well,
yeah,
it's healthy, so they'll eat loads of it.
Yes, because it's better than potatoes. Sometimes.
so it could well be that it's that sweet fix that they're still craving.
Could be. I think there's also a thing which we haven't mentioned, which is does occur, which is a thing called volume addiction.
Yeah.
So some people, particularly if they've been food addicted for a while, actually get kind of addicted to having a really big amount of food. And what they think's going on is that when we really stretch the stomach, we get oxytocin, interestingly, the closeness hormone, and serotonin released. So some people are pursuing getting the closeness, comfort feeling from volume of food, not even kinds of food. And sometimes it can be people eating healthy foods like sweet potatoes, broccoli, it's the kind of the amount that they want.
Yeah, when David was saying earlier about, I think it was David who was saying about the 4 kilos of grains or the liver, my addiction, I call it Kevin. Kevin was like, I'll have the 4 kilos of whatever it is. It's that amount that I want it. We both looked at each other, didn't we? We'll have the grains.
4 kilos of grains, yeah, no problem. No problem at all. Any more questions? Joanne?
I take it you're going to reapply to the WHO with your
Oh, thanks for the cue. Yes, I should have said that. We have actually reapplied. A few weeks ago, it's just gone in, so we're waiting with bated breath, although it's usually a few months before we get the reply. And also, Ashley Gerhardt and colleagues in the States have applied to the DSM, which is the American system. The WHO look after the system we tend to use in Europe, European doctors. So, fingers crossed, and if anybody wants to know how they can go in to the system and support us, because it's actually a public platform. You could go in and say, yes, I believe this is a thing and this is my experience, so let us know. Anybody? There was another one.
Sorry. With the government seeking to control how much sun gets through, so spraying things into the skies, and with them wanting to create more and more 15-minute cities, and with the harm that's being done to the farmers and the war on meat, I wonder how I can see that they're not actually doing this on purpose to make us more addicted, and to make us more unhealthy, so that we, choose big pharma as a solution. I think it's very corrupt and done on purpose. I wonder what you thought.
It's hard not to see it that way, and I think the only thing we can do, and people are starting to do, which gives me hope, is we vote with our pounds, we vote with our feet. So we support our local farmers, support our local butchers, do everything we can to live this way, and that it spreads because other people, we've had it just literally down our road in the last 10 years, just about all the neighbours, one by one, really heard our message and have sort of gone over to eating this way. If everybody here goes home and talks to all of their networks, that's an incredibly large number of people, and we all try and buy local and eat seasonal. I think it's got to be a ground-up revolution.
Yeah, I agree with that as well, because that science that Jen was talking about, that hyper-palatability science, is exactly that. They want you to be addicted to it, so you keep buying it, and then to make yourself well, get the medicines. It's a big loop. And I saw an interesting post the other day about how people, like say, voting with their feet, a mass exodus of just let's not buy that stuff anymore. The more people that just don't buy that, eventually they're going to be putting things out there that it's going to raise the profits, but hopefully will be something that is more appropriate and more real food based. So that's the way to get around it and have that ripple effect.
Hi, Dr. Jen. How did you trick your grandkids to go low carb?
Well, we kind of didn't have to, because the kids had already gone low carb. We didn't force anybody, but of course when they came to us, that's how they got fed. I think they saw the difference it made, particularly to David's health. He had high blood pressure, he had type 2 diabetes, he was having little sleeps in the afternoon. I lost quite a bit of weight and kind of felt so much better. I think they saw the difference it made. They tried it for themselves, and they felt, particularly Robert, who's now a butcher, hurrah, lucky us, felt incredibly well when he cut out gluten, processed foods, and so on. And the same with our daughter. She had a thyroid problem, but the minute she went, real food keto, it just disappeared. And our youngest, he had an overweight problem, probably got from me genetically, and that was completely solved when he reduced his carbohydrates. So they all discovered it for themselves, and then it's the older two that have had children, and they've just brought the children up that way. So I think it is more difficult when you've got to take those foods off them, but they didn't have to do that because the kids were already.
Well, actually, I was thinking I can answer the question for you too, actually, because when we were at your house, you actually made it interesting for the kids, and you sat there and you made ice cream, but you took them through it step by step, and they involved the kids, so it was all part of it. It wasn't just thrust upon them. Cream. They told that that's it, the cream in the metal.
Frozen fruits from the supermarket, a bag of frozen fruits from the supermarket, just tip in a carton of cream and stir it with a strong spoon. David does it because it's quite hard work, and it slowly turns into a version of ice cream, which they love.
I can't have it.
No, I can't have it because we don't have dairy, but it's fine for the kids, isn't it? So they love that, and they just enjoy being involved with the cooking, I think.
Okay, so is this on? Two more questions. There's one here and one more after that, because we're running over a bit, but you can capture Jen afterwards. She's around.
What I have to say is not really a question or so much as a cautionary tale. Someone else's question about asking about addictions to non-processed foods and the carrots kind of triggered it. But Ashton Kutcher was training for his role when he was playing Steve Jobs, and he ate like Steve Jobs to like fully get into character. And a lot of Steve Jobs' diet was, I think it's called fruitarian, and a lot of it consisted of carrot juices, and as a result he ended up with pancreatitis on several occasions and was hospitalized a couple of times. So yeah, there's still dangers in unprocessed foods that are classed as that we're taught to be healthy can carry the same risks and dangers to your health.
Thank you.
He messed about his pancreas playing the role of Steve Jobs, did he? And Steve Jobs died of pancreatic cancer. Interesting.
Wow.
We got one more question. We got time for anyone?
Tiny observation.
A tiny observation, Joan.
So, as you know, I was a GP, and I had a child brought in with what was called a carrot nose, and it was because she had drunk so much carrot juice. So, vegetables are not that healthy, are they, if you do that?
Orange nose. Thank
True.
you.
Yeah. And sweet potatoes, I don't know. I always just find them quite disappointing. They put so much salt on them trying to make them taste like a real potato.
Yeah.
But now, having had kidney stones and knowing the oxalates in the sweet potatoes, just have a real potato if you want a potato. Anyway, Jen, amazing. Thank you so much for having me.